And now, the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. My friend, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. I've lived a life that's full, I've traveled each and every highway, but more, much more than this, I did it my way.
我は汝、汝は我。汝、ここに新たなるちぎりを得たり。ちぎりはすなわち、囚われを破らんとする反逆の翼なり。我、正義のペルソナの生誕に祝福の風を得たり、自由へと至るさらなる力とならん。
Beginning on June 9th and running up to this point in November, you are playing a secret game against Goro Akechi, who gave himself away from his first encounter that he is not who he sells himself as. He becomes representative of Ren's Justice Arcana, which itself represents in its upright position equity, righteousness, and triumph of the deserving side of the law, but in reverse equates to bigotry, confirmation bias, excessive severity, and law as a system being more worthy of maintaining than the well-being and rights of the people. Right side up, it's the ideal that all are equal before the law. Reversed, it represents that justice is unbalanced, swaying to defend the powerful, while used as a sword to strike down the innocent or victimized from having a voice in the world.
僕は組織の人間です。個人的な感情より組織の論理を優先します。
And throughout the game, we have seen examples of his confirmation bias in Akechi's actions, making observations without evidence that the Phantom Thieves are always in the wrong on any matter in comparison to him, the Detective Prince, who is aligned with the righteous cause of serving justice. But justice for whom? As from all the media appearances he makes, he never defines what his sense of justice is. Yet as the Confidant story with Akechi goes forward, you constantly see him mired in half-truths and double-talk, incapable of giving a straight answer and seeking to avoid one. When we play him in billiards, he deliberately uses the wrong hand, claiming a greater dexterity with it we never see of him. Despite giving constant tells, he is worse at the game. He never even admits he's playing at a handicap until he's called out. It would be truthful for him to say he's handicapping himself, but it's only when he's caught does he do so, shrugging it off as not a big deal amidst him trying to deflect and deceive. He's constantly putting himself on TV, relishing in the attention, always dismissing serious questions that refute his words with a smile and a joke, but when he interacts with the very fans he plays to, he acts like he doesn't want anything to do with or be around them. When he interacts with Makoto, he acts as if the choices Makoto makes to support or condemn the thieves before she joins them will determine her fate, yet is deliberately digging barbs at her lack of wisdom once she actually joins them, despite them having not interacted past that earlier point for him to know what her revised stance is. Hell, Akechi constantly showcases his knowledge of more going on than he should, which presents a disturbing glee to unnerving those around him, as there's no way for him to have that knowledge, such as Yusuke's identity as Madarame's former pupil after we change his heart, when that isn't public knowledge and would have deliberately been redacted in order to prevent anyone potentially coming after Yusuke in revenge for Madarame swindling them by proxy. And yes, that is something which happens in real life to be concerned over such. Alongside Medjed's war declaration only releasing after he encounters and points out it happened. Hell, him knowing Futaba's identity is a massive, massive red flag, as he didn't get this from Sai as he later claims he did. For even as far gone as Sai was, she wouldn't reveal something like that to someone uninvolved. And while Akechi feigns surprise at Morgana talking, he shows no surprise at Morgana's true metaverse Philaneko form. But why would he be surprised at Morgana talking at all? After all, he already heard the cat talk.
やっぱり君は面白いな。その冷静さは僕にはないよ。でも僕の推理も面白かったろ？僕らが手を組んだらいいコンビになりそうだ。なんてね。
And dialogue like that, inflected like that, is all over Akechi's conversations and declarations throughout the entire game, and it's why it becomes so easy to point out whenever he lies. The closest we get to the truth of him is when he speaks of his mother, him only sharing this information to get sympathy points and to distract from his awareness of Futaba's history. What he reveals is his mother was a prostitute who tried to raise him herself after his father abandoned them due to the image that would present. His mom dying from the job, and him being passed around foster homes until the last few years. In fact, you most see the slavering monster that hides behind a well-adjusted, cultured man when the subject of his father is brought up to him, and the vendetta he still holds. Which is where he most slips up, exposing that the stories he relates to us for sympathy, the information he provides, and even the bonds he makes are nothing but lies. Or at least even there, heavily obfuscate the facts and Akechi's true feelings. For in truth, his hatred is the only thing we can trust that isn't a lie. For as we hit the rank 8 of his Confidant, he challenges us to a fight, which again exposes how much he has been lying all of this time, in advance of this coming betrayal. Not to protect anyone with those deceptions, but just because he can, because it makes things easier for him. As he cannot stand being outdone in anything by anyone, because it pokes at the back of his head whether the very things he has dedicated his life to are all wrong. And he refuses to believe he is the one in the wrong. No matter what happens, no matter who he has to kill to prove it, he must be the one in the right.
正直に言うけど、僕は君が嫌いだ。その境遇で腐らない君が、僕を超えようとする君が、僕とは違う君がかも尺に触る。僕は君にだけは負けたくないんだ。本当にね、僕自身ここまでとは思わなかったよ。
君は殺したいと思うほど憎い人がいるかい？
ああ、いる。
そんな風に考えてはいけないと思っていた。ルールに従って戦わなければそれはただの人殺しだって。でも今僕は憎しみに支配されている。
憎めばいい。
ありがとうルルーシュ。
気にするな。俺たち友達だろ。
It is for these reasons, and more beyond them, that in counterpoint to the Lelouch illusion that is baked into the protagonist all game long, Goro Akechi is the Suzaku Kururugi of Persona 5 storyline, and I will not budge on this point. He is the traitor in our midst, always bearing their own agenda, held secret from everyone around him, while he lambasts those that oppose him as the ones in the wrong. Whereas his own path that creates victims as consequence of it, he would be discouraged from if he would just open up and accept others, but he cannot. Because his way, his goals, are more important to him than the reality of the cost to following it. Because he believes his way, and only his way, is right. Despite, as Mikoto herself has established, there are multiple ways to believe and present one being just that are not always held by and maintained by a system. And yet, as we've seen all game, the abuse of systems has made it so only the undeserving are given power. But think on this further. Who put the abusers of these systems in power to start with?
騒がれてる事件は廃人化だけじゃない。人が突然理由もなく事故や不祥事を起こす人間の暴走。真犯人は
心を暴走させる力も持っていないと説明がつかない。そうさ、俺のお前らにはない俺だけの力だ。
今の暴走を人間相手にホイホイ使ったってのか。
ってやるよ、本当の俺をさ。来いロッキー。くだらねえ、くだらねえな。正義だろ、仲間だろ、目障りなんだよ、どいつもこいつも。
二つの力を使い分けるだと？なんてやつだ。姿さえ嘘だったってのか。
Yeah, it was Akechi. It was always Akechi. He awakened his persona 2.5 years ago. He used it to explore the metaverse and found out who his father was. Masayoshi Shido. He came to him, told him of this power, and offered to make every ambition of his come true using this gift, to make his father value him, before tearing everything down to make him fall from his heights of power before killing him, all by gifting him the knowledge that he should have had this from the start had he not abandoned his lover and child. But that would only happen, Shido would only be put on that pedestal to then be pushed off of it to his death, if both of them worked together, constructing a conspiracy to cause civil unrest so deeply that it could not be ignored. And Shido would ride the wave of this publicity into the position of Prime Minister on the backs of the people Akechi would kill, or mind screw into their service, controlling the criminals that funded them through the palaces Akechi would create, and the prosecution office they would have under their thumb, pulling the strings of everything. Akechi's true persona, Loki, who I should not need to give a biopsy on due to the Marvel version of the mythical character being ubiquitous in pop culture these days, gives him the ability to distort people's shadows on top of killing them, deliberately causing both the psychotic breakdowns and the formation of palaces as a result, depending on the distortion being expressed externally or internalized. He killed Futaba's mother, with Shido being the one to speak and deliver the suicide note that seeded Futaba's palace to make it so their one potential witness to Akechi's origins would silence themselves. He killed Haru's father because the elder Okamura, after having his own palace seeded, overused Akechi's services, which drew attention to them before breaking from their plan to place Shido into office. He rendered Oya's friend Kaio brain dead for no more than uncovering Shido was doing something with a corrupt politician, as Shido's image for Akechi's plan to work could not be tarnished in any way, likely there being a lot more victims atop that for similar reasons. He is the one who seeded the palaces through creating distortions in the shadows of the rulers, and consequently is responsible for Sai's entire situation, as they needed an easily manipulated graduate through which their prosecutions could be controlled, and hold a thumb over the criminals they corroborated with and received funding from, Madarame and Kaneshiro, in exchange for their silence. Even the situation with Shujin Academy, as stated before, is connected to this due to the conspiracy holding control over the school. Kamoshida, either a means of pacification for potential threats from younger groups, an early test for the viability of palaces, a quick means of indoctrination to then lead his victims onto a pipeline into service, or Kamoshida was always meant to be a ticking time bomb that would only prove Shido's political talking points about the needs for social reform. There's a lot of flexibility on Kamoshida's case, but it is still the point that everything associated with the palaces and distorted hearts has direct connections to the conspiracy, and those that began it. Akechi, the facilitator of it all, just to get his father into the place he wants, so he can murder him. Now, some of this, they were on Shido's orders, but Akechi did not object. He made no claim to morality or considered the consequences of his actions, only seeking to justify and excuse them, while he continuously did what all the palace rulers themselves do: place the blame for the consequences of what they did on everyone else but themselves. As every death, every twisted heart, every victim he created, every person harmed as a result of his actions, and every crime he made others commit to build his reputation as the second Detective Prince, was all in the name of him achieving his grand goal of making his father admit he was wrong to throw him away, wrong to disregard him and his mother, who he does blame just as much for not being able to keep his father's attention, while placing himself in the right by building up Shido to be so much worse than he is. For when he would kill and collapse Shido's palace himself, everyone would then be made aware of how much of a monster Shido was, vindicating himself in the process. Even the game plays up how truly monstrous Shido is now, which warrants and justifies taking Shido down. Except there's one problem with that. Much of Shido's own active malice, just like the other palace rulers, is a result of the distortion that was planted in him, which loosened his morals even more than they already had been in his own rise through the political ranks that had made him cast off Akechi and his mother from the start. And as a consequence of that, anything Shido has done while he has been distorted, while he is still responsible for them, Akechi holds equal liability in. And not just him. Akechi was responsible for the mental state in all of the palace rulers that made them believe it was good for them to do what they did just to benefit themselves. But unlike the others, where they had whatever morals they had blocked off artificially by being distorted, Akechi is not affected by a distortion. He is the distortion. The distortion that creates monsters, dredges demons up from hell to possess the bodies of victims to create more victims in turn. And it all caused by how much of an empty void he is, because everything he presents to the world is itself a lie he could not care less about.
出現して自爆しろ。
ざまれざまれざまれ仲間それがなんだったんだよ俺のどこがお前に劣ってるんだ誰かに望まれるために成績や大人の評判に徹底的にこだわり抜いた俺は名探偵でカリスマだそれが前歴持ちで屋根裏に住んでるゴミにどうして俺がなんでお前なんかが俺にないもん持ってんだよなんで俺よりゴミの貴様が特別なんだよ
This is by far the largest basis by why I consider Akechi the Suzaku equivalent in this game. Because Suzaku and Akechi are both traitors to the very causes they claim loyalty to. Betraying their friends, their family, the public they claim to stand for, and walk all over the victims of their actions just for the chance to prove themselves right and get what they want regardless of the true cost to it. It doesn't matter who they harm. They generally don't care as long as they get their way, nor care to consider what happens after they achieve their goal or the cost of doing it their way, because they are empty. And because of it, any ending that does not bear them being crushed by the weight of their sins is a bad one. They are so obviously the ones happily enabling the big bads of their respective series all along the way, while wrapped in cloth of deception, disguising how their justice is naught but empty platitudes. And you have to seriously not be paying attention to any of his dialogue to not catch on to the constant doublespeak he says. And obvious he is that he knows things he shouldn't. When you're paying attention, he keeps giving himself away from the very start of the game. It's just in the final confrontations that the story reaffirms all of that for all the people that weren't being attentive to the details. And yet, really stupid fans think these are all asspulls to deliberately make him guilty, instead of this working to expand on why he is guilty and state it for the record.
なるほどな。自分で暴走させたターゲットの事件を自分で解決させてたってことか。それもシドと手を組んでな。
This is especially true of any ruminations he makes about the cases, where anytime he accuses someone else of a crime, it's made plainly obvious that it's a confession, and he's getting off on his in-joke that no one else around him will actually get, as they lack context to them. He's literally rubbing his nose in the face of the people chasing him, dropping clue after clue with wanton abandon, and yet no one picks up on it. And I've not exactly been subtle in alluding to it any time I brought it up, though I'll explain the one people probably missed. See, in each palace of the game, characters can gain equipment themed after those palaces. Not everyone does in every palace, but it is noticeable when you're using them. Case in point, the dagger Joker gets in Futaba's palace looks like something that would fit with an ancient Egyptian theme. Okamura's palace is themed after science fiction. Ren, Ryuji, and Haru can pick up weapons there that do look futuristic. And what do we find Akechi wielding when he becomes a party member? A laser blade and a ray gun, which, by the rules of how the metaverse should not work there because they don't have real-world working counterparts. Unless those weapons were obtained in the metaverse itself. While I stretched for a joke in reference to the Quasar Saber you can buy from EYs, it's because, well, that itself has retroactively become a reference alluding to Akechi's guilt. For there was a Persona 5 stage play which debuted in 2019, and recurring Sentai actor Hiroya Matsumoto, best known as Tsubasa Ozu from Maji Ranger and Masato Jin from Go Busters, played Kunikazu Okamura in those stage plays. Meaning, yes, through the power of actor illusion, Akechi actually did murder a Sentai actor to gain access to a laser blade. Though again, me being silly with the Toku references would have made more sense had Akechi's starting weapon been the Quasar Saber. It's not, so it just becomes more of a happy coincidence. But for a more concrete example showing how they did in fact plan this from the start, let's also address the thief alias, Crow. And this is where I go off on the localization being bad again by implying Karasu should mean raven. Because in Japanese mythology, mystical crows referred to as Karasu are used explicitly in two ways, and only two ways. The first is them being used as messengers by divine beings. The second being open, deliberate traitors to their friends, family, and the causes they have sworn their loyalties to. To label oneself as a Karasu, as a crow, is a widespread, ubiquitous sign of one invoking such a treasonous persona, that the occurrences in Japanese fiction of one subverting this mythological narrative motif and stigma is just Crow from Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. I'm not kidding, 5D's Crow is literally the only straight example I'm aware of. Though I do know of a few that use the motif to pound themselves off as more of an internal affairs investigator that betray their bosses over betraying the protagonists. But they still did betray someone. One such example being the character Crow the Phantom Knife that debuted in the Goro series Makai no Hana. And even with 5D's Crow, there's been a rumor since that show introduced Crow as a character that he was originally intended to secretly be one of 5D's villainous Dark Signer characters and the final antagonist of that arc, only for Konami to supposedly insist it be changed due to the Blackwing archetype becoming stupidly popular in the card game. Now we have never gotten confirmation that such was the original plan, only that Konami has done executive meddling across that entire franchise to make such plausibly believable. But this near-unanimous use of Crow and Karasu as betrayers, backstabbers, and traitors in Japanese media, alongside the final Earthbound Immortal introduced in that arc being one that perfectly fits as being part of Crow's Blackwings deck, is why that rumor persists to this day, as we've never gotten a single series writer interview that's ever asked any of them about it, it only being mentioned to the series directors, and of course the series directors wouldn't know about it. They're the directors! They're not the ones that actually wrote the series! And this sole, outright subversion against just so many examples I could name, is actually why Japanese authors have tried to downplay or reduce the use of this storytelling trope in their media, because the second you have a character associated with a crow, it is automatically assumed that they will be a traitor, which thus would make the storytelling around those characters boring due to how forehead-slapping obvious it becomes. And with exception to 5Ds, again, at least as far as I'm aware, every time that suspicion has proven itself correct. Which again ties back to Atlas's absurd demand that people not spoil the story. As when you are aware of this crap, there are no surprises even when you're experiencing this story for the first time. Hell, I feel like I did a better job of preserving the game's big twist than they did by not deliberately drawing attention to it while still alluding to and seeding it in snark. It doesn't mean the story is told badly, because outside of Morgana's shit, it isn't. But it's why Atlas's efforts to try and bury discussion of this through arbitrary enforcement of a spoiler window actually ended up undermining the story's intentions and gaslighting the player base into making the game out to be worse than it is. But for those who aren't familiar, you're probably wondering how those of us who knew he was the villain that enables the malice of all the other villains character for the game from the start. And well, it's quite simple. You remember how I started this all off in saying that every major cast member was a subversion of their voice actors' prior roles? Well, that was a thing we caught the earliest in this out of all of them, short of Jun Fukuyama's. As Akechi's Japanese voice actor is Seiichiro Hoshi!
ただのネイティブアウターだ。ちゃんとした名前もねえ、てめえのような立派な立場ってやつもねえ。それでもただ一つだけてめえに勝ってるもんがある。これがそれだけが俺の自慢のこの戦術。 キラヤマトフリーダム行きます。惚れたぜその心意気。 間に合ったな。俺が無敵の喧嘩番長大門勝だ。生きた。
愚か者が。
なあ、三蔵、腹減った。
壁でも食ってろ。おい、静かにしろ。ふざけるな。お前なんかに食べさせるもんは何もねえよ。
ケチ。 だったら俺自分で取りに行く。
自分で何言ってんのか分かってんな。
飯気楽なドリーマーエンジンバカだよ。
指令の懸念通りやはり鎌倉とノーブルレッドには何らかのつながりがあるとみて。
どうぞ。
的中です。おそらくは証拠物品を狙ってと思われます。 よくここまでたどり着いたね。あな
たが私を元いた世界に導いてくださるの？
そうさ。君が望むところへならどこへだって騙されちゃいけない。その赤の騎士は騎士業界の中でも有名なナンパ師だ。たくそういうのを野暮って言うんだって白の騎士。オタク評判悪いよ。
And if you can't catch the pattern from all of that, Seiichiro Hoshi, regardless of the temperament to his characters, has overwhelmingly played those who are adverse to and rebellious towards structured establishments and governmental systems, and frequently becomes a rebel to malicious powers. Yet here he was doing nothing but play a character that reinforces the establishment. Now, I'll admit, including Gino Weinberg from Code Geass on that list is a borderline example, but to many, including myself, Gino ended up a character we wished Suzaku was. him being someone that recognized the failures of the system, but sought their own freedom from being controlled through exploitation of its flaws that were already there, as he ultimately fought for the people instead of those who ruled. Gino is disliked among Code Geass fans, but that's more because of how Sunrise kept trying to make the writing staff turn him into an alternative love interest for Callan to choose over Lelouch. But that's something literally no one wanted, and such is a trait that was in part carried over here by Makoto's chapter of the story, because she is the Callan XP, with such being a war between following the path Sai and Akechi took, and compromising her morals to act as part of the conspiracy's plans and system, or awakening her own rebellion in agreement with the protagonist's path, that deliberately put them in opposition to Akechi's schemes, because, of course, no one could be allowed to be special, to have this power, but himself. And if that isn't enough, the game outright spells out that because of the pancake incident when we met Akechi, where we deliberately hear him respond to words spoken by Morgana, which could only happen if he had been to the metaverse at all, that the main cast had been onto him from the start of his scheme. Akechi being so arrogant to believe that no one could be in on his deception, and through that, we've been doing nothing but play him throughout the infiltration of Sai's palace, as we found that we could not trust him and his claims to working for a selfless cause due to his own storyline-long ambivalence. All done with the purpose of determining his goals and his guilt, as a means to take down the conspiracy and clear their names once and for all. But that is in turn where the most irritating of all discourse among Persona 5 players is rooted. This mistaken, bullheaded, and 100% unfounded belief that Akechi's role in the story was a late-end change to the game's plans, and the Black Mask murderer was meant to be someone else. Namely, as inferred before, Makoto, because international fans literally misunderstood her arc thanks to the garbage localization of her chapter and the pop culture tells many wouldn't be aware of. And Haru, because they were completely fooled by the worst written chapter of the game's attempts to make her into a red herring. And to be clear, it's the worst chapter of the game because of the Morgana bullshit, not anything Haru herself does wrong to warrant the baffling hate she gets as well. There's such invalid discourse over this, that it's half the reason why Akechi rates so highly on Persona 5's character popularity polls, despite him being the primary villain of the story. As idiots think the Atlas developers did him dirty, when, no, he was written to be the villain of the narrative all along, and the worst thing Atlas's dev team did was try and backtrack on it. For the record, the other half of the people that uprank him among the cast members, despite how monstrous he is those who ship him with Joker. Hell, that sect is the same group that keep uprating Suzaku among Code Geass polls because crack shippers like to pair the victim with their abuser. But that's what makes such so terrible. You can't fix them, because there is nothing to fix. They're empty inside. They were always empty inside. And that emptiness cannot be filled.
Some men aren't looking for anything logical, like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Oh, and yes, that emptiness, as I inferred before, is the hidden 10th sin of the deadly sins of man from that expanded roster of sins that counts more than 7, with the sin of emptiness better known as sociopathy, when you are incapable of caring for anyone but yourself and those you claim to value are only done so in how they relate to you. You have no true empathy for others. You only care about what they give you, and their own needs, values, and opinions are not to ever be considered over your own. You don't indulge in any one sin too greatly, but your apathy towards others' plights means you passively enable or create evil by your very existence. This is why there is some scrap data that implies Akechi himself was supposed to have a palace of his own placed between Sai and Shido's. But as I said before, Persona users cannot possess palaces by the very natures of them being in tune with their inner self, and Akechi is not someone with a distorted heart. He is a distortion in the world who creates and facilitates the distorting of others into malicious forces. He's the Suzaku. He was always meant as the Suzaku. And he will always be the Suzaku. Getting in the way of the Joker Lelouch from not only acting the best way to help the people, but preventing the proper reformation of the world. All because it wasn't done by him in the way he wanted it to be done, and the way that opposes him would itself undo everything he himself did.
敵討ちなんてことは
所詮無謀の衆復讐なんて気概あいつらにありませんよ念のため監視はしておきますが
頼んだぞ
死の恐怖に怯えて暮らしてもらいましょう僕たちの邪魔をした罰だ
おかしな猫も見つけ次第殺せ
わかりました所詮猫ですし心配ないとは思いますがね
それよりもそろそろ自殺の処理が始まっている頃でしょう発表されれば忙しくなりますよコメントを用意しないと
こちらも対応の準備をせねばなあと特捜部長どうするかね
近いうち病死でもするんじゃないですか
まさかこの私までおのれシド
But for the many people that are probably tired of this year-long compare-contrast, well, I'll say again, Persona 5 is not Code Geass. Despite the inspiration and parallels, it's a frankly better told story, for the most part. One that is not slaved to this idiotic mandate that its tale end with the hero's death. And thus, there is only one thing, that will ultimately save us. And that is the final accessible arcana in the game, at least by the point in the chronological timeline by which it flags.
我は汝は我汝ここに新たなるちぎりを得たりちぎりはすなわち囚われを破らんとする反逆の翼なり我審判のペルソナの生誕に祝福の風を得たり自由へと至るさらなる力とならん
For the purpose of the framing device in the 100-hour flashback arc was all done to build a rapport with Sai herself, as she is the key to our salvation. Whether she comes to believe in us or not is what sets her on the path to being a confidant, and in the flash-forward scenes, she gains more and more trust in us. This, ironically, makes her the fastest anyone has actually developed a blood oath in the history of the Persona franchise, as Ren goes from gaining the bond and connection to completing it in what is presumed to approximately be an hour, and not more than 2.
でも、あの限られた時間の中でよく私を落としたわよね。自信あったの?
And it's also important, at least to the reading of Sai's character that I have been presenting throughout this review, on what the key shift to her change into believing in us was. Makoto and Kaneshiro. Remember that speculative theory I've been presenting, that Kaneshiro was involved in her father's death? It's the flash forward that occurs directly in tandem with July 9th, the day Kaneshiro timeline-wise turns himself in, and learning of Makoto's role in taking him down, that Sai begins to believe in them, and their roles as arbiters of justice, tearing away the spiritual blinders from sinners corrupted by supernatural means, which grants us the rank 1 to her confidants. Even while in the flashback, that is the one she is most angry about. Her rage being calmed by learning Makoto was the one to take him down only makes sense if the vendetta against Kaneshiro was personal, not professional. And the only personal reason she could have was if Kaneshiro was involved in her losing someone important, which all signs would point to being her dad. But regardless of whether that is true, from that point onwards, it legitimizes her opening herself up to listening, not assuming, and hearing Ren out. because all subsequent engagements with the flash-forward segments have Sai coming to more and more agree with our methodology, how the Phantom Thieves did not harm people, merely removed the mental block caused by psychological distortions that prevent individuals from realizing the harm their actions would do to others, and in turn, realized how much she herself was mistaken in building a case that framed the Phantom Thieves for the psychotic breakdowns and mental shutdowns, but also how much she had been led to that conclusion by those around her, specifically her superior part of the conspiracy, as well as Akechi himself. Akechi, who all game long had been leading her along by the nose and directing her attention where their superiors wanted it. And also, one other detail of this, because before Akechi ever approached Ren, who was the one he tried to sink his teeth into? And thus, well, this is a separate part to that speculative theory, but unlike prior parts where it could be true but is never confirmed, this aspect requires a fair amount of timeline reworking, for otherwise it can't be canon in the final product. As well, the circumstances of the death around Officer Najima sound like a psychotic breakdown followed by a mental shutdown. Officer Najima is hit full-on by a truck driver with connections to the mafia he was investigating. And right after that, the driver dies under mysterious circumstances that are assumed to be a drug overdose. This is in fact the exact same way the earliest breakdowns and shutdown incidents are described before more were afflicted with the conditions. But it can't be, because Officer Najima's death occurs 3 years before the start of the storyline in 2013, while Akechi is confirmed as awakening his powers in early 2014, and meets with Shido to become his metaverse assassin not long after.
お前と出会ってもう2年半になるか。
And 2.5 years before December 2016 is June 2014, August 21st, 2014 also being the date Wakaba was murdered. Thus the timeline don't work for saying Akechi killed the parents of a third member of the Phantom Thieves instead of just 2. But due to how it's described originally, I think he was meant to be Officer Najima's murderer as well. Now, I have absolutely nothing to back this up, more than this nagging feeling in the back of my head, but the more I ruminate over the details of the story, it would have been more cohesive if he had been. After all, we don't have a good grasp on how Kaneshiro got involved with the conspiracy if it starts later, as then, why would Cost be covering for his activities to give him the cognition of qualified immunity through which to build his palace's foundations, if he didn't have the political connection to the conspiracy yet? Whereas it makes more sense and would be more narratively cohesive if they scouted him out and then killed the officer they couldn't influence to look the other way through metaverse manipulation, so there'd be no way to track it back to them. The only loophole to all that being if the conspiracy actually started earlier, and Akechi only walked into it after his awakening. But then that raises further questions. Hell, just a 2-year span already is too short a window for Shido to gather the connections he has into his service with Akechi's help for them to be so loyal and widespread as they are depicted. Which is more fixed if you move the timeline to Akechi getting his powers back a further year for him and Shido to build or influence those forces to their whims, or if Akechi only walked in to the conspiracy already existing. And not only that, this one then in the same way Futaba's palace was first forged, have given the conspiracy that same opportunity to seed Sai's palace as well, since they gave her her job offer to be a prosecutor at her father's funeral, and thus she would actively be a victim of his as well. Literally every canonically loose piece fits this way. It even further emphasizes how much of a monster Akechi is, as he's spent years working alongside Sai, providing her falsified evidence for the cases he brings to her, just so he can unknowingly to her thumb his nose at her and her efforts, while taunting her with the reality that the man who ruined her life is always right in front of her, and she just wouldn't have known it. Now again, I have nothing to back this up as something that was changed behind the scenes, but it is a story change I feel would have made the pieces all fit together better. But why they wouldn't have considered it, or possibly even skilled in tying them all together like that, is because almost immediately after revealing Akechi as the true villain and traitor among us, they started trying to backpedal and excuse his criminality. And a third murderer with a personal connection to the main cast would likely have been taking it too far for audiences to buy anyone forgiving him. Especially as such, was a hard sell from the start many audiences, including myself, rejected, or otherwise became a component in the fraudulent arguments against other cast members, which likewise ignored the personal sins Akechi should have been held accountable for, that is only as widespread as it is because that started from the Atlas developers themselves. For by the time Sai's Confidant ends, she has been read in on Akechi and his father's criminality, and that being exactly why she chooses to help Ren out and ultimately save his life. For if her suspicions are correct and in line with the ones the audience has, then this is the only opportunity she has to take down not just those who were involved in her father's death, but the very people she's been trying to prosecute this entire time, who she has in fact been working for. How does she do it then? Well, it's very simple. For you see, it has already been well established that the metanav spreads like a virus, and she has Ren's phone. Thus, all Sai needs to do is have the phone near Akechi, and as Futaba's already hacked both Ren and Akechi's phones, it permits her to trigger the metanav app to transition Sai and Akechi into the metaverse. Because Sai is so rarely in this section of the precinct and courthouse, she has a poor cognition of it. And as was established before, areas that palace rulers have poor cognition of in their territory are not altered by it, which makes them appear normal. And with her mentally expecting Ren to be still locked up in that room, Akechi could just walk right in and shoot the cognitive manifestation of Joker, and leave the real one in the real world untouched by the attack. With Futaba's previous hacking of Akechi's phone not only allowing her to record his activities, but freely trigger the metanav to transition him without his own awareness when a location looks normal to travelers. And thus Akechi believes Ren dead when the murder itself never took place. Sai consequently hiding out Ren until no one is the wiser to make it so the reports of his death will be greatly exaggerated. You have no idea how long I've been wanting to spoof that Mark Twain quote. But yeah, the importance of the framing device is convincing her that our justice, our approach, was the only correct option we had in the face of a conspiracy harming everyone it crossed paths with, including herself. But that's also why it feels worthless because of how much it intruded on the story, when we literally could have had a storyline-long Q&A session at this point to build up the tension, as then the player would have had to ask themselves who the traitor could have possibly been, thus placing even more importance on getting the questions right, and in doing so, building the blood oath organically to emphasize how critical it was. But the difficulty in even doing this with Sai, the bullheaded zeal she possesses in doing things herself and to her own standards, is consequently why she in turn becomes the Cornelia Lee Britannia equivalent to this story as well, as the elder sister that believes she knows best, only for her actions to be constantly manipulated by those actually behind the circumstances of her greatest personal losses, failures, and hardship, with her consequently treating her sister poorly until that sister acts out in defiance to her whims. Granted, this is only equivalent to our one Cornelia, diverging from the point where Cornelia could have reformed before the end of the series, had she just realized the true culprit of everything she regretted far earlier than she did, which Sai is herself allowed to become aware of for one simple reason. That being, they left in place Sai's palace. And as a consequence of that, her envy, her jealousy over never being allowed an honest win because of the odds deliberately being stacked against her by the very people she is now allowed to realize are the villains, with her finally claiming that victory by awakening her own metaphorical spirit of rebellion, and defying the masters that had kept her as their chained dog ever since her father's death.
その目にかけることにする。見せるだけでいいのね。
我は汝、汝は我。汝ここにちぎりを血明の絆へと転生せしめたり。絆は反逆の翼となりて魂のくびきを打ち破らん。今こそ汝、審判の究極なる非王に目覚めたり。無尽の力を汝に与えん。
With Sai on our side now, the conspiracy is none the wiser to Ren's survival, allowing him to recover from his injuries before reconvening with the Phantom Thieves, revealing the entirety of their counterplan to stick it to Akechi. For while all his attention was placed on Ren, the others were able to operate unhindered to plot out more of Sai's palace and surrounding areas, Futaba prepping their tech to record Akechi's admissions, and completing their exit strategy by Ryuji and Yusuke faking their theft of Sai's treasure. Oh, Sai's palace still does exist, for the moment. However, defeating her shadow to put it back in her right mind again, alongside Sai learning everything she does? Yeah, it's collapsing fast in the same way Futaba's did, sans the Persona Awakening part of it, because the distortion that has blinded her to reality has still been destroyed. It's just through this way, it is done through Sai's own efforts and choice. Like Sojiro and a few other supporting confidants, the possibility of seeing a proper Persona Awakening to further accent Sai's arc is unfortunately the stuff of fanfiction, and sadly not one I've actually seen yet done by someone who actually understood the subtextual story beats of the game. I honestly feel like it may have been better to have her get that alongside Zenkichi when he's introduced to Strikers, but due to her job as a lawyer, she is unfortunately not exactly a frontline member with the same level of freedom to act as the rest of them due to her own responsibilities. It would actually be interesting to see, but within the framework of Persona 5's meta-narrative, her palace suddenly collapsing earlier in the timeline out of nowhere, well, would be a larger cause for concern by the conspiracy that likely make them kill her in the same way her father was eliminated far earlier. But thanks to Akechi calling him, the group now knows who their penultimate target is, and they are short on time. For Shido's scheme, which Akechi has enabled, as I said earlier, is to get him crowned Prime Minister of Japan. His own palace at this point consuming everything in sight, thanks to the popularity the takedown of the thieves has brought him. Make it so it's not but a foregone conclusion he'll be elected into office as Shido's perception filter effect begins to expand farther and farther, making people think he can do no wrong, even as Shido himself has been one of those behind everything making their lives hell. Have I mentioned that this game has aged very well when compared to the politics of the last decade, as he just keeps shouting the quiet part out loud?
お前と出会ってもう2年半になるか。
当時あなたは官僚機構に対抗できる若手だと注目されてましたね。おかげで出る杭を打とうとする輩にスキャンダルを狙われた。
腐った老害どもの罠にはまるとはな。その時だったな。特別な力があるとお前が売り込んできたのは、例の認知の研究を偶然かじっていなければ頭がおかしいと突っぱねていたところだ。
僕はトラブル相手を暴走させてスキャンダルをなかったことにした。
まさか他人の心、暴走でも廃人化でも好きにできるとはな。そんなお前が今後も支援すると言ってきた時は何が狙いかと勘ぐったものだ。
志の高い思想に共鳴したからですよ。
Yeah, this is where Akechi and Shido's part in the timeline is qualified.
若葉の研究を潰して資料を押収したのは多分指導だ。いや、そもそも若葉が死んだのからして指導が絡んでいる。俺はそう踏んでた。けど俺は何もできなかった。双葉を守ることを選んで身を隠した。
それ早く言えよ。
まあ信じたからこそあの研究を強引に引き上げました。力はお前だけが使えればいい。 解明されては厄介だからな。
一式若葉でしたっけ、あの研究者。素直に従えば死ぬことはなかったのに。
どんな小さな懸念も根元から断つべきだ。不審な点は大概もみ消せる。
Again, for the people who would claim the Black Mask was supposed to be Makoto or Haru, what even would their motivation have been for Wakaba's murder over this? 'Cause I cannot think of one. Hell, it would have made even more sense for both Shido and Akechi to know Wakaba personally, instead of in passing as they frame it, possibly with Akechi being Wakaba's test subject regarding the metaverse, to have researched and known as much as she eventually was revealed to make her study of it be so critical to the execution of their plans.
おかげで私は清廉潔白なイメージをたやすく守って大衆の人気を独り占めにできる。民意さえ得てしまえば、あとは勝手に各界から協力者がすり寄ってくる。警察だって例外じゃない。もともとこちらは検察の幹部を抑えているんだ。影響力を持つくらいたやすい。
怪盗団が出てきた時は少し厄介なことになるかと思いましたけどね。
調べてみればただのガキどもだ。全部の罪をなすりつけてしまえばいい。
今回の一件で僕の名は全国、いや世界にまで轟きました。人心を操る怪人に法の力と頭脳で打ち勝ったヒーローとしてきっと語り継がれるでしょう。あとは出しゃばらず学業に励みますよ。
お前くらいの年じゃそう生臭いことも思いつかんか。
将来のことは考えてますがね。
He's not, though. That's another lie. Akechi's like a dog chasing a car. He wouldn't know what to do with it after catching it. So yeah, with Akechi and Shido believing the thieves are disbanded with their leader dead, and Shido's palace's influence permitting his speeches of no substance to sway hearts and minds, that leaves us to freely approach and enter his palace. A giant private ship cruising through the ruined, sinking landscape they have deliberately let be flooded by the rising tide their actions created, all to benefit off of the pain they have caused. Again, extremely topical to modern politics. I could keep going on that. To say there is no political message in this game is to either be completely ignorant of or not understand politics. Shido's overwhelming sin is of pride, his ego inflating his self-importance to the point he wants all to worship him, framing such all as him being the people's savior, even as he locks them out from their rights and entitlements. The entire internals of the ship, actually resembling a palace, where all obey the ruler without question, despite this being the government building where all law for the country is decided. To get close to Shido and his treasure, contained in the palace's recreation of the Japanese Senate, it requires us obtain a collection of recommendation letters, keycards, and access codes to authorize us entrance. They are all hidden around the ship, and are held by the combination of cognitions and shadows of Shido's co-conspirators. Among them being the IT company head that masqueraded as MedJed and worked to frame the Phantoms. As a result, if one pays attention to what every cognition in here actually says, you get an idea of all of the plots Shido has been part of which Akechi has facilitated. Though again, not all of them. Remember, those involved with the conspiracy, even if they were only financial backers like Madarame, Kaneshiro, and Okamura, could make use of Akechi's services to make their opposition disappear. While Shido facilitated these transactions, they were not part of his sin. Those are on Akechi, because he did them solely to maintain his cover to get Shido where he wanted him. What we can pin to Shido in here, however, are all the issues with the transportation system, Kobayakawa's death, and the entire situation revolving around Kamoshida's abuses and his palace, Kaneshiro's police immunity, the IT rep as said before, and even a TV producer that had been behind most of Akechi's promotion on the air and among their talk shows, which permitted Akechi premium access throughout the metaverse as he grew it, due to his penetration into the popular consciousness, which the thieves themselves have not had to bear the same access. Though I admit, while this stage helps put in context for people who weren't catching the clues earlier, on how ever-present Akechi and Shido's malice has been, this is the single most difficult to navigate palace of them all, as I actually keep getting lost in it in my effort to find every opportunity to see the Shido's own sins exposed by the Elder's own cognition, leading me to get turned around and backtrack a fair amount. Not helped when his security system turns us into little rodents, reflecting Shido's view that the normal people not part of the bureaucracy are so beneath his notice that they are all like rats scurrying around, nibbling at the edges of his kingdom. Considering I've experienced mice infestations before, one actually ruined a really comfortable couch we kept in our basement when I was a kid, never underestimate the possibility of rodents getting in where you live. It's for things like this that make Shido's palace in specific a complication. In every previous palace, the ruler's focus and how their palace was constructed was defensive in mindset with regards to protecting their treasure. While there were guards, barricades, puzzles, and traps, the ruler's cognition wouldn't go out of their way to deliberately attack the trespassers. They'd fall to the guards or the traps and barricades would hinder them until the guards would catch them. But here, this rodent form puzzle is different as it is not a passive defense. It acts to preemptively attack intruders and debilitate them before they can become a threat or infiltrate too far. Even the outright shadows of others who have become part of his cognition, whom we have to talk to, are traps, requiring members of the cast go against their own desires just to get a word in edgewise with them, which is worsened when we just start defeating them as special shadows whose job it is to check on the locks begin to hunt us down due to Shido's awareness of the metaverse. Though as we defeat the enslaved conspirator shadows and learn of their secrets, in the real world Shido begins to suspect something might be wrong, and the remaining thieves are retaliating, making Akechi realize the deception they fooled him with, and come in after us.
甘く見ていたよ。本当に面白いやつだよ、君は。口数は少ないけど、行動力も度胸もある。こんな立場じゃなきゃ、いいライバル同士になれたのかもね。
Akechi uses this opportunity to spill the beans of his plans, that he set up the entire palace system as one grand revenge scheme against his father, again justifying his actions and shifting the blame onto his victims to once more prove he is the distortion, and not himself distorted, with how he condemns others for his own actions that left them no choice.
あと数週間で全てが実るはずだった。それをお前らが。だがまだ取り返せる。お前ら全員の首があればな。
そんなことのために首はやらねえよ。大層なこと言ってるが、要はガキがダダこねてるだけだぜ。
The subsequent fight with Akechi is not an easy one either, due to him exploiting Loki's passive ability to turn Shadow psychotic, ultimately losing his cool enough with the defeats we hand him to unleash his true persona and reveal his true self as the real Black Mask Crow Zero. But of course, the web of deception, lies, and distortions is worthless in the face of the world's myriad truths.
Puny god.
With Akechi's defeat, however, it's revealed his short-sighted childish plan that has harmed so many? Yeah, it was all for nothing from the start. His big grand plan to reveal that he was the child Shido abandoned? Yeah, as if Shido didn't already know that. Shido's own cognition of Akechi reflects how much of a fool Shido's viewed him as ever since Shido was given his distortion. All thanks to Shido's existing awareness of the metaverse, thanks to Wakaba's stolen research material. Thanks to Akechi, he was given everything he needs to rule over Japan, as well as the mentality to become the tyrant all willingly bow down to.
そうとも、俺は人形さ。なんだってする。けど、俺が人形なら、本当の人形はお前だろ？認められたかったんだろ？愛されたかったんだろ？ お前はさ、花から人形だったんだよ。
Now, I have a lot of problems with this scene, from its framing to its attempt to excuse the personal actions Akechi took in order for the story to impotently pin them all on his bastard of the sperm donor, to even this last-minute attempt at a redemption from him, even though Akechi himself is responsible for setting in motion everything that has made the world go wrong after he got his powers. His personal actions are his own. You can't shift the blame on them. Those are Akechi's personal sins you have to hold him accountable over, as Shido would not have done them without Akechi's influence. Redemption in one's final moments, to give sympathy for the devil despite everything they base their sympathy on being a lie, to ignore the evils he himself spread, especially for someone who has been unrepentant up to this point in the actions they took, does not work in the way Persona 5's dev team wanted to. As such, has become more and more of a caustic, self-destructive plot device that has itself ruined larger stories they are part of. For the hypocrisy of both cast and narrative required to make them sick is just that damn high a bar that when you don't clear it, the story itself falls flat on its face and undermines the rest, especially with every person who is suddenly sympathetic also being a victim of actions he set in motion. But we'll discuss that more in depth next time, when Royal made this whole matter worse. But for now...
Yes, there were times, I'm sure you knew, when I bit off more than I could chew. But through it all, when there was doubt, I ate it up and spit it out. The record shows I took the blows and did it my way.
我は汝、汝は我。汝ここにちぎりを血明の絆へと転生せしめたり。絆は反逆の翼となりて魂のくびきを打ち破らん。今こそ汝、正義の究極なる非王に目覚めたり。無尽の力を汝に与えん。
With Akechi's death, our path is now open to Shido's treasure, which means it's calling card time. And to collapse the last palace Akechi helped create, technically second to last, but we're not quite there yet, well, Futaba has decided that such requires a very special calling card.
警察意外と素早いね。でもはい残念。
その男の正体はあろうことか現職の閣僚特命担当大臣志藤正義。
この通り、私たちは誰も死んでなんかないよ。嘘かどうか、お偉い人とか分かる人は分かるよね。彼がどんな罪を犯してきたかは近く本人の口から語られることになるでしょう。
いや、
どうぞ
まさか。
その前に我々がこの国を頂戴する。
いいだろ。Now, here's a question I never found a good answer to. It was established early in the game that one can't, or at least shouldn't be able to, make recordings while in the metaverse. That being why Ryuji couldn't use anything he tried to film as grounds for Kamoshida's criminality in his palace. The early story hinged on how they couldn't get substantial proof of his actions, which gets undermined if at any point later there's proven ways they could have done so. So since the Thief team are in their metaverse outfits in that snippet, where could they have filmed that if you can't make recordings in the metaverse? If the answer is something along the lines of, the Mananav just locks out recording on their phones and other means are possible, then that's completely fine. But it nonetheless weakens the earlier story and generates the plot hole of if other recording equipment works, why didn't they just try that earlier? As it actually would make sense that any recordings made in the metaverse would just be blank, or show normal reality, as the metaverse itself is a cognitive reality and not a physical one. Hell, Akechi getting a photo of himself in his Crows Zero form was originally one of the pieces of evidence showcasing his deception as well, due to that prior establishing detail about recordings not being possible. Regardless, the conspiracy realizes they've been had, with no evidence of Joker's death actually existing to back up their earlier claims. Sai, at this point, faking her change of heart just taking place to avert suspicion from her, as the various members of the conspiracy try to strong-arm everyone else into admitting anything in the most visibly criminal ways possible, all as Shido panics that he has no defenses left, save for a direct confrontation.
が現れたのも神が私に期待しているからだ。私だから明智のあの力も有用に使えたんだ。
Yeah, funny story. Though, again, I hate this scene for trying to let Akechi off the hook for his own actions by claiming Akechi did them all for Shido, when Akechi himself admitted that was not the case. He did it to entrap Shido in criminality. It's just Akechi couldn't see that Shido himself was aware of what he was doing to be able to strike first.
己の幸福以外は自己責任という名の他力本願。そんな愚民どもの願いを叶えてやるんだ。それが神に選ばれたこの私にしかなせない世直しだ。
そんなの誰も望んでない。
望んでいないならばなぜ私は選ばれた。なぜ私に総理の椅子が明け渡された。
Again, that's the perception filter effect of a palace. A palace created by Akechi seeding it, which indoctrinates them. Not someone's own free will permitting them the choice. You see why this becomes circular logic? Hell, while that plays into our final original heist, that's based off of a deception as well, where it's just as easy to claim divine mandate as a means to, like every other distorted being in this game, shift the blame.
なら残念だが、諸君を排除するしかない。取るに足らん小さなほころびだが、そんな甘さで大国すらも滅びる。私はそういうミスは犯さない。
いつの間に。
言っておくが、見苦しく暴れたあの具足と同じには考えんことだ。
お前。
さあ、速やかに死にたまえ。
うちのリーダーが世話になった礼だ。
You know, it's visually apt that the demon form of Shido, Samael, initially manifests as this lion made from corpses. The gold they've been entombed in doing nothing to overshadow how monstrous the construct is. Samael, for those unaware, is the venom of God. Depending on sourcebook, he acts as either a former angel of death, among the first fallen angels, the king of demons, one of several beings to be called by the title of Satan, and potentially the partner of Lilith who sired the Christian figure Cain instead of Adam. Because the depiction keeps shifting erratically, however, one of the few things that's always associated with him has been his own pride and right to act as judge and overseer. And while the idiom, pride cometh before the fall, doesn't originate specifically from him, it certainly has been seen in association with him. And that idiom does fit how the battle with Shido goes. Every separate stage of it ripping away his falsely earned regalia as his conceited notions are laid bare, until he can acknowledge nothing but how he created his own worst enemy when he frames someone else for his own misconduct.
あの時の生意気なクソガキがよくぞここまで邪魔をしてくれたものだ。正直想定外だったよ。こうなる前に徹底的に潰しておくべきだった。しかし私はやり遂げたのだ。この国の舵を取るという野望をついに現実にした。私の野望はまだ始まったばかりなのだ。小僧、今さら貴様のような路傍の小石ごときにつまずくわけにはいかん。今度こそくだらぬ因縁を私自身の手で
全て晴らしてやる。
まさかこんな小僧に。
すまなかったな。誰かにすまないなんて気持ちを抱くのは随分と久しいかもしれん。
Yeah, he isn't. He's distracting us. As in the real world, Shido is trying to prevent a change of heart from occurring, from his distortion from disappearing, through his agents putting him in a death-like state to kill his palace and anyone within it. But as said, because the distortions are implanted instead of manifest from the person's own misconduct, that only ensures that the palace preventing him from realizing and feeling the weight of his sins will still be destroyed. So it's a meaningless gesture that will still lead to him confessing his sins. All it does in the short term is appear to risk the thieves' lives. Ryuji getting the one contractually obligated Mamoru Miyano is a badass moment to use his restored running capabilities to secure them a lifeboat off the ship, seemingly at the cost of himself.
いや、なんでよ、なんで、リュウジ、
つがよ、パレスって爆発しすぎじゃね？普通に消えろっての。んだよ。
死んだんだよね。
は？爆発で吹っ飛んで、気づいたら芝生で寝てって。つか生きてね？何？お前泣き顔いけてねー。
あんたのせいだっての。
The irony that every time a palace collapsed, they could have just written it out is just funny to me. Though there is an actual reason for them needing a lifeboat, even off of a cognitive sinking ship. For those not familiar, when an object sinks into water, it causes a riptide to form that pulls down everything else nearby due to the displacement that sinking causes. Humans near ships that are going down consequently get pulled down with it. Thus why lifeboats are needed to safely escape from them, regardless of the means of survival those boats supply after the ship is fully sunk. But yeah, with Shido done for, game over, right? Perception filter popped, Shido not going to become Prime Minister. The entire conspiracy is going to be arrested and committed with the Phantoms properly retiring, right? Oh, if only. For you see, this is specifically why I kept hammering in that the perception filter effect exists throughout the game, to selectively alter people's cognitions of the events occurring around them and blind them to actions they can take. Because even with Shido's palace being demolished and him having his change of heart, the populace are still being indoctrinated into following along with whoever's in charge. It isn't a last-minute thing coming out of nowhere that has continuously been framed as in discussion of the game. It's always been there. Excused at times by other activities, but it has been an influence, and only grown in strength with each palace ruler. And the remainder of the conspiracy is rallying around how people still seem to be indoctrinated to their cause, and are looking to put in place a different figurehead to replace Shido to take advantage of it, permitting them to still achieve all of their goals, and through that, still be able to ruin the Phantoms' lives and that of everyone else in Japan. Which only goes to show that all of this is not something of Shido's doing, but something he was enabled to do by external forces. So the prior attempt to shift the blame from Akechi to Shido for everything just falls flat. Because this is all a result of the system Akechi was working to maintain that was done entirely independently of Akechi's bastard of a sperm donor, making it plainly clear that Shido and the other palace rulers, despite the malice they caused both before and after their empowerment, were not the puppeteers. Just puppets having their strings pulled while being made to ignore they were there.
お前の更生を阻む元凶。まさかそれがお前が正義を示さんとした愚民たちだったとはな。姿さえ見えぬ相手に熱狂し、自ら林立てたのではなかったか。それを今さら見えない者はおらぬという。もてあそんでおきながら誰一人責任を負うこともなし。人の世の歪みは果てしなく深い。もはやトリックスターの出現で正そうなど不可能なことやもしれんな。
Which does fit with what I said before, that the distortions that form the palaces make the selected rulers act against their own best interests, through them indulging in their respective sin as a distraction against what they actually do to harm people, and that harm being written off as caused by that person. As if the entire purpose was to generate the passive indoctrination brought from the perception filter to make people not think about the sins going on around them. Because it was. After all, who empowered Akechi from the start? As has been established in all prior Persona games, the awakening of someone as a Persona user requires the bestowing, presence of, or connection to some spark of the supernatural. In Persona 4, that being Izanami doing that to Adachi, Namatame, and Narukami, with Narukami's nature of a wildcard permitting the subsequent awakenings of the investigation team through him giving them that push to accept their berserk-driven shadows. In the earliest games of the series, that spark came from Philemon himself. And in Persona 3, that spark came from more artificial infusions of supernatural energy, which researchers had uncovered. But while Ren's once more came from attendants of the Velvet Room, and thus Philemon himself through proxy, the question becomes who gave Akechi his spark, which was subsequently awakened, that set everything else that Akechi himself caused in motion. Well, we still have a good place to look. After all, we haven't figured out Morgana's stuff yet, nor have we been to the deepest depths of Mementos to figure out what the hell is making the subway network of Japan look like the ever-shifting palace of distortion that it is. Which consequently becomes our next goal. If the conspiracy is using the continued strengthening of the perception filter thanks to Mementos' existence, then they need to go in and collapse Mementos as well to get rid of it. Even if it costs Morgana the answers to the questions of his existence he has.
我は汝、汝は我。汝、ここに新たなるちぎりを得たり。ちぎりはすなわち、囚われを破らんとする反逆の翼なり。我、魔術師のペルソナの生誕に祝福の風を得たり。自由へと至るさらなる力とならん。
And I've been avoiding this one more than Oya's for a reason. And that aside from Akechi, Morgana is the character I like the absolute least in this game. Even though his Code Geass character parallel is one of the more obvious ones, with him being equivalent to the cast's mascot, cat, Arthur. The Villain Echo Thief does not change in any significant, meaningful way, and as I addressed in the last two videos, any claim to the contrary is invalidated by how Morgana's mistreatment of the others, especially Ryuji, is never called out. The bond of his connection is always story-related, increasing only in tandem with the completion of tasks he believes will lead to the restoration of his humanity. Yet Morgana does not showcase or embody any true human traits or idiosyncrasies in comparison to his cat-like appearance. nor beyond his ability to sense treasure does he have any special skills of note, making what knowledge and awareness he has irrelevant by the midpoint of the game. And he wasn't exactly helpful at that from the start due to the trouble we keep getting into that someone actually competent and experienced in ways he claims to be would actually showcase. And this not really helped that Morgana isn't much of a role subversion of his voice actor's prior roles, said actress being Ikue Otani, who most would know better for portraying everyone's favorite electric rodent Pikachu, as well as Tony Chopper in One Piece and Naruto's Konohamaru Sarutobi, as each of the involved all have their own asshole mascot moments. Really, I kind of feel Cassandra Morris in the English dub got more mileage from such acting as a role subversion, as in comparison to her roles of the likes of Yubel or Kyubey, she wasn't portraying a magical mascot that was insane or a sociopath, just an asshole. Really, her portrayal of Morgana had more in common with when she played Rebecca Rossellini in Lupin Part 4, in that she sold him as being so eager to achieve his goals that he doesn't consider others' wants, needs, feelings, or well-being, which are different than his own. Not because Morgana is incapable of considering anyone but himself, but because his personal desire to recover what he was is just that all-consuming, that his patience with distractions or things that slow him down is so short so as to be a hair trigger, but that never acts to excuse his mistreatment of others, nor the story's own facilitation and excusal of his senseless spite. And really, Cassandra portrayed this same character story better when she voiced Sophie in the English dub of Tales of Grace's F. And yes, every review I've done this year has an active degree of cross-connection. Why do you think I kept having to delay them all? Nor is it helped by his Magician Arcana representing untapped potential and talents in its upright position, and in reverse showing such potential is unfocused and unable to be manifested, with the reverse position likewise bearing ties to madness and mental distress, most centrally that of schizophrenia. This is why Morgana, for some who didn't catch on to Akechi's guilt, was considered as a possible suspect for the one triggering the distortions. Even though in reality Morgana is supposed to represent and be manifested from, spoilers for something we're going to discuss in a little bit, the collective unconsciousness of humanity having an argument with itself. Morgana not being a cursed human at all, but an entity deliberately created to act as a counterforce against the palaces, distortions, and attempts to enslave human cognition, with even Morgana himself being unaware of this due to the circumstances of his creation. This also explaining why his attempts to explain the metaverse are so bad. He doesn't understand it himself, but is regurgitating knowledge he was implanted with that he expects to be commonplace and second nature, instead of thinking it through. But as has been my complaint, that doesn't justify nor excuse his poor treatment of others, which is my sticking point against him, as even to the end of the game, he just never learns when to stop.
我は汝、汝は我。汝ここに、ちぎりを血明の絆へと転生せしめたり。絆は反逆の翼となりて、魂のくびきを打ち破らん。今こそ汝、魔術師の究極なる非王に目覚めたり。無尽の力を汝に与え。
我が輩の中で新たな力が燃えている。
よし。
This time, as we descend through Mementos, we see more and more of the cognitions of trains fitting themselves stuffed to the gills of more and more of the people's shadows, being sucked down from the metaverse into the tunnels and corralled into its deepest depths, which reveals itself to be one massive prison. a prison where all the pacified shadows indoctrinated by the influence of the other palaces have been getting dragged down into all this time as we've been chasing down other matters. Us literally missing the ongoing means through which human will has been getting turned against its own self-interests. Us even meeting the shadows of those we've removed the distortions of, as their distortions, ironically enough, gave them resistance to being dragged down in here. Though once removed, them coming here has actually been part of preventing their actual reformations. For it's easier for them to just exist here in this prison, uncaring to them not acting to pay back their dues by them slothfully lazing about. While everyone else, they're just trapped.
You're trapped! By societal convention! Look, we're in a fine dining environment. Everyone knows not to throw a scene in a fancy restaurant. That's right, you're trapped. Sit down.
As contrary to what the game following this asserts, this is not a prison of societies, of the collective consciousness's own making. This is another palace, formed by another distortion, that is the consequence of humanity's collective desires themselves becoming distorted so they don't want to change, don't want to make things better for themselves and those around them. They just want to exist without worrying about anything, abandon the responsibilities they have to contribute to a collective, and just lazily listen and believe everything they hear, no matter how fraudulent it is. But that's not freedom or individuality. That's slaving yourself to a lie because it's the easy option, the slothful option to give up your own power to enable someone who is inevitably pulling your strings. Worse, Morgana recognizes this place as where he was born, and where he escaped from blindly, trying to remember his life and purpose, when this prison in the palace first formed to become an existential threat to human existence. As all the prisons trapping the shadows have power lines leading down, draining human spirits and will into one massive holy grail at the core of the earth. It representing the distorted treasure of humanity's palace and the ultimate culmination of another's entire scheme. All enabled by their original empowerment of Goro Akechi building this distorted palace through Akechi's actions. Every mind pacified by the palaces in turn feeding the power of this grail, and thus permitting the expansion of Mementos and its influence over the metaverse's collective consciousness in turn. For with the enslaved minds of humanity being made to empower it, restored with their will taken as its own, the power of this carved grail overflows with such strength that any damage the phantoms try to inflict to it is instantly restored, preventing them from being able to succeed in collapsing Mementos, even as the sludge of the grail shows its own sentience. And thus the enslaved wills of humanity are directed to do the worst thing this entity could make them do. Give up. And as the metaverse expands one final time, making the line between cognition and reality collapse and become one, the control this entity has over humanity makes them forget that the concept of rebellion even exists.
俺だってリュウジ嘘でしょ
俺たちに何か。
やだやだ消えちゃう体が。そうか。
そうとも私ではない。貴様たちが人々の認知から消えようとしているのだ。
この声。
メメントスと現実が一つになった。故に認知から消えた者はもういずこにも存在できない。
失敗だ。
結局構成は果たされなかったな。見込み違いだったようだ。
Oh, hey Igor. Any advice to give in this all is lost moment? Igor? Igor? You don't seem like yourself.
お前の命をな。汝を死刑に処する。
And I gotta admit, this, playing with expectations like they did, this was nothing short of genius. Everyone clued in to the commonalities of Seiichiro Hoshi's prior roles, and how Akechi contradicted them, guessed that Akechi was planned as the bad guy. It was an open secret from the first week the game launched, regardless of Atlas's idiocy in trying to stamp down on it. But what happened with Igor? Yeah, no one called it, explicitly because of the circumstances around the actor change. As I said at the start, Igor's original actor, Isamu Tananoka, had died. So fans aware of this were expecting a change in voices from the start. And that expectation hid that Igor had been the third villain of the game all along, thanks to someone pulling their strings.
我は汝、汝は我。汝、ここに新たなるちぎりを得たり。ちぎりはすなわち、囚われを破らんとする反逆の翼なり。我、愚者のペルソナの生誕に祝福の風を得たり。自由へと至るさらなる力とならん。
And yet, throughout our Confidant arc with Igor, we can't help but feel unsettled by this man who was so comforting, accommodating, assuring, and a little comical in voice and mannerism by the original Isamu Tananoka's betrayal. Hell, this had also previously been captured wonderfully by English voice actor Dan Warren in the previous games as well. Yet for new players coming into the franchise, there was no way for them to know of the actor change from the start. They would only be able to assume Igor was always like this. Dan Warren, best known as Byakuya Kuchiki and Zenaku, is still alive, by the way, for those who were curious. So this is another thing that didn't quite carry over into the dub as obfuscation. But he too was replaced in the English dub for Persona 5 by David Lodge and Kirk Thornton, respectively, for the purpose of facilitating this twist. And I cannot blame them for that. Though it did make some English dub-only fans upset, as David Lodge wasn't Igor to them. With the irony being, he actually wasn't. No, who David Lodge and the new Japanese voice actor Masane Sukayama, best known as Zoken Mato from the Fate franchise, were portraying was the entity who sought to be empowered by this holy grail of human will. The god of control, Yalda Beda. Yabadabadu. Da. Yalda-ba-oth. And if those line flubs did not give you any indication, I have a great deal of difficulty saying that name. But yeah, this entity, which is also known as Demiurge, which is a much easier name to say, which I will be substituting in here as a result, comes to us from Gnostic mythology. Again, So anyone who watched my review of Xenogears last year should be able to tell where I am going with this, since Gnosticism so very much influenced that game's story beats. And the fact that Gnosticism overwhelmingly revolves around false divinity having enslaved corporeal existence to separate them from actual divinity. For the Demiurge is a false god, created by real gods as a mechanism for maintaining the physical universe separate from the spiritual universe. But through its own ignorance of true creation and jealousy towards its own creators, the Demiurge fashions itself in the guise of a god. Other depictions portray it as a literal aborted fetus of a deity, thus to claim the godhood that it believes as its right, deliberately chains and enslaves human will to its own, twisting and distorting the world it was originally tasked to maintain in order for it to have a proper birth by the world viewing it as a god, and that perception making it so. In some stories, Demiurge was even the original creator of Adam, which was naught but a doll the Demiurge played with to prove how it was a god of creation, only for the Demiurge's own creator Sophia to grant Adam the spark of life instead. The Demiurge was angered by this and created Eve as a new means of enslavement to its will, and for Demiurge's creator to again intervene. Some stories saying Sophia did so herself. Some say the first fallen angel and rebel against the heavens, Satanael, did so in her stead after being told by the true All-Creator to not intervene, which Satanael refused to obey, falling from heaven in order to right this wrong and give humanity the free will Demiurge had selfishly denied them. Regardless of who, they tempt Adam and Eve to make a choice in defying the Demiurge's will by granting them the fruit of knowledge, with them subsequently leaving the biblical Eden and Demiurge's capacity to control them at all. Demiurge then schemes to control the world of man by damning them all to hell for the explicit purpose of trapping the souls of humanity away from ever reaching the divine above, because they should worship and be commanded by no other god than the Demiurge itself. Thus, it's spreading the deadly sins of man in order to make humanity not worthy of surpassing it themselves. But because of its status as an aborted god, it needs to be born first, which can only come from it being worshipped as a god. And with the Grail, that just happened. For in fact, that was its plan all along. As for those who might not realize what the whole plan actually was, Demiurge's plot was to awaken the power of Persona in Akechi and grant to him the ability, through his true persona Loki, to create distortions in the people. These distortions would act as chains binding their souls to corruptive sins that would then enslave the minds of those distorted and then victimized by the distorted, and through doing so, pacify their wills to another's voice by them praying for salvation from these evils, allowing it to grow in power through this influence all this time. This means that no matter what Akechi did, as long as Akechi continued to abuse the powers he was granted, Demiurge's power would grow, expanding the territory it controlled, Mementos, and permitting its own superseding distortion of reality until the walls all crumbled down.
煽る者なお明智五郎彼が勝てば人間の世界を壊して作り直すもう一人は抗うトリックスターそれが彼
こいつが勝てば人間の世界を残すそういうゲームのはずだった表向きはな
悪心は知っていたのです怠惰な人間に変革など起きぬことをなぜなら悪心は大衆の歪んだ願いそのものなのですから
By the time Philemon or the Velvet Room attendants noticed, it was already too late, and Demiurge had grown powerful enough to cut off Philemon from interfering, and bound the will of Igor to himself to possess him as a host, as Igor and the attendants themselves are not true living beings, but animated puppets and dolls themselves. Because they do not possess souls or free will in the same way humanity does, it means Demiurge could effortlessly control their wills. This alluded to in Justine and Carolyn's Confidant arc, where there is a deliberately placed gap in their memories, which leave them subservient to Igor, which coincides with when Demiurge took them over. When was that? Why, when they sent out a cry for help, and a wild card responded. And thus, this has been what Demiurge, through his masquerade of Igor, has been doing this entire time. They've been playing both sides of the chessboard to reach their desired end result, moving pieces into place so they don't really have to do anything more than set them against each other, as every possible act they could make has already been accounted for. Akechi reaches his goal and kills Shido. All the pacified shadows still come down to empower his grail. Shido kills Akechi. As Demiurge is the source of Akechi's power to create distortions, he can assume control and influence over the palace rulers who have been made distorted, subsuming their sin into his, and the same result occurs. And we just saw what happens if Ren succeeds in collapsing the palaces. He wins, regardless of what anyone does, as they're all so focused on the other pieces on the board that they pay no attention to the one moving the pieces around until they're already in check. Because in directing that wildcard himself through the path of reformation, he never specified what sin they committed that required reform, with the answer being the sin Demiurge cannot abide, that of free choice. And thus, because the protagonist and his allies never knew what question to ask, there was no way for the thieves to know that their rage against the machine was doing nothing but add fuel to the fire that would start an engine leading to the world's subjugation. And in the Demiurge's mind, that machine of subjugation is required for reformation by it finally removing from the world the tainted curse of creation that is free will.
なぜ我が聖杯でありながら神だと思う。選ばずともよい自由、考えずともよい自由。だが皆が誰かに肩代わりをさせた気でおれば、実際は誰もしておらぬのが当然の道理。そこに広がる巨大な歪みを誰が引き受ける。
Now, some might ask, doesn't this exonerate Akechi of his sins? Because he was being manipulated and controlled by Demiurge? Nope. You know why? Because Demiurge was not controlling him. He has no dominion over anyone that is awakened as a Persona user due to that spark of rebellion putting them beyond his grasp. He cannot manipulate their shadows, their souls, as they no longer live nor exist in the metaverse where Demiurge's dominion has taken root, by which to trap them. And this thus being why Persona users cannot have palaces. They have accepted their true selves, so a seed that distorts a view of oneself that is required for Demiurge to control them cannot take root. That is their true self. This is the entire point of why Joker has been getting the runaround. He's a literal wild card that if he isn't distracted, could have just continued to explore Mementos until he found another way down that wasn't blocked by the gates connected to the other palaces. And in fact, the formation of the other palaces to pacify the people acted as guards against easy access to Demiurge to begin with. As if they came down here too early, they could have potentially attacked the Grail Demiurge needed to empower itself before it had enough influence over humanity to will the damage to it away. Akechi, by comparison, could not have given enough of a damn about the Grail to even consider attacking it, as all he cared about was killing Shido. Now, what Demiurge and those trapped in his palace says somewhat contradicts this. That the people said to have escaped Demiurge's prison did so because they had such strong wills that they warped their own cognition to get away from it. But this acts in contradiction to how the palaces all play into Demiurge's schemes. And if Demiurge was already a truly manifested deity, it would not need the will of the people to empower and give birth to it as their new worshipped god. That statement of fact from him, which sadly many discussing the game, including the wikis, have taken as fact, are just another lie Demiurge has told, by which to make it seem that its own will is that true and inescapable, when the reality is it rigged the game to get what it wanted from the start. because his prison did not exist from the start. He needed to use power obtained from the distortions of the palaces to build it, and then had to corral the shadows down here to be enslaved to his will. This is not where the shadows were trapped from the start, as that contradicts everything about Demiurge's lore and what were presented. It just says that this is the proper state of humanity as a means by which to make people think that fighting it is pointless, even though that is the actual lie. And as a result, this is one of the easiest Code Geass parallels to make. Yaldabaoth, Demiurge, is the Charles Z. Britannia of the game, both seeking to make humanity give up their free will to him, all to reclaim a past and dominion that never truly existed to begin with and was never truly theirs, while playing revisionist history with people's minds to always put themselves in the right of the divine mandate, while bearing no need to micromanage the pieces they put in play, as any move they make benefits them. And so, the only thing stopping it now from being able to have its way are those humans whose spirits bear within them the sparks of divinity, and consequently, the bonds they have forged because of it. For while Demiurge has possessed Igor, he hasn't taken control of the twins, in fact using and manipulating them because they bear the ability to use persona. And Ren standing against them reminds them of all they have experienced with them, and of their blood oath, which sparks rebellion in their own hearts that were cleaved in two a year before by Demiurge himself. For Justine and Carolyn are in fact two pieces of the same whole, the one who cried out for help which Ren answered the call to. And in using the fusion system of the Velvet Room, they are recombined into their true self, the attendant Lavenza, who unleashes her full power to banish Demiurge from Igor's body.
我は汝、汝は我。汝ここにちぎりを血明の絆へと転生せしめたり。絆は反逆の翼となりて、魂のくびきを打ち破らん。今こそ汝、愚者の究極なる非王に目覚めたり。無尽の力を汝に与え。
いやはや、この場所、随分と久しいですな。ようこそ我がベルベットルームへ。
From there, we need to recover our companions. It revealed that they were all sealed within this isolation ward of Demiurge's prison to keep them from reminding the people of any will but its own. Joker's own spirit of rebellion being so dangerous as it can reignite others due to the wild card. And that's why Demiurge intended to kill him once his usefulness ran out. Morgana having recovered his lost memories at this point as well, coming to know that he was never human, but his purpose nonetheless was to purge a malicious spirit from the spiritual world. Igor and Lavenza's last-ditch effort to subvert Demiurge's control by having Morgana find and serve the chosen trickster Wildcard, and in doing so, act as guide in leading them down to the sources of distortion, which Morgana in his own way actually botched when you think about it, though it still worked out in the end. All we need to do now is smash that Grail's chalice in. To make a long story short, too late! Demiurge has distributed its power of control to varied angels under its dominion as a new pantheon, but also set those angels up as the chief guards against any potential thoughts of rebellion. So destroying each and every one of them returns the will of those under their respective influences to sanity and self-control. And because the thieves now know the trick of the Grail's strength, they can sever its power to break its hold. And yes, I did have Haru be the one to do that deliberately because of the actor illusion of when Haruka Tamatsu did that before. This forces the Demiurge to reveal its true form to show that even the Grail of worship is a lie, now declaring it will cleanse humanity from existence for its disobedience.
我が輩たちの未来、そしてこの世界。 取り返してやろうぜ!
Again, why is Jun Fukuyama not allowed to voice lines he should be in this game? Especially when they are lines he has performed beautifully before. This is another one that should have been his. Hell, almost everything Morgana says should have been one of Joker's lines. Can you see how keeping the protagonist as an effective mute is now undermining their storytelling? For with all of the Demiurge's mental manipulation and perception filters destroyed, the world can see the phantoms fighting for them, seeking to save them from this false god's hell. And with them all praying for salvation, those prayers are no longer directed at the false god. They're instead directed at the man who embodies the spirit of the very first rebellion.
Usero! バカな！人々の願いを奪うのか!
There are no strings on me. The Demiurge's world merger of the metaverse and reality ends, but because this group killed the god that maintains the world system, it means the metaverse is going to be completely cut off from the real world. At least for a time. Meaning the Phantom Thieves are not only losing their powers, but also Morgana. Oh no, so terrible. But with the perception filters finally gone, it means that Shido's criminality can now be recognized. Him confessing to everything they need to put him away forever. Except for one thing. Unless they can have someone or some evidence that can connect the metaverse to the mental shutdowns, they can't make the charges stick. And because the metaverse just collapsed, they can't bring people there to prove it must exist. Meaning for Shido to be convicted, a Phantom Thief must pay the penance of their actions and be charged in order for their testimony to act against him. And Ren legitimately has broken the terms of his original parole.
シド周辺の事件を解明するため、私は動く。すべて明るみに出すつもりよ。二度と世間が歪まないようにね。それをあなたも望んでいるでしょ?
Yes, for as frustrating as it is, it's what's needed. It's what someone acting responsibly would do. To take ownership and be held accountable for one's own actions. And in a system that isn't distorted, one can place faith that one would be judged fairly.
その必要はないですよ.
And then there's this asshole, popping out of nowhere, and offering to take Ren's place. The idea from this brought that, due to the way Ryuji escaped from Shido's palace being just riding it out until the entire distortion popped, that if Akechi had survived in the metaverse for long enough, he might have himself been able to escape. And Akechi is guilty, after all, of actually committing the many murders of the storyline. Which is still insanely convenient, to think he somehow survived being on the brink of death as he did, and will turn himself in just to make sure his father suffers forever in jail. Something something doesn't feel right about this. Almost as if we've forgotten something. Oh wait, right, this is the royal version, meaning there's one more palace out there.